This week, Trump's national security advisor caught up in a communications leak with a journalist. Our panel weighs in. Think DEI is dead in your kid's school? Think again. And Democrats trying to find their voice, making fun of people in wheelchairs? These stories and much more straight ahead this week on The Lion Week in Review. Welcome in to another edition of The Lion Week in Review. It's a weekly look at the culture, the courts, your state capitol, and your kids. I'm Chris Stigall. Now, let's meet the panel. The gentleman this week behind the stories at readlion.com. Josh Mann is our managing editor, Michael Ryan, executive editor, and Adam Wittenberg is deputy editor here at The Lion. We start with a really important discussion on Capitol Hill this week. Missouri Senator Schmitt, who has been one of, I think, the greatest allies for free speech in the country, Michael Ryan, held some hearings on the government's abuses and partnerships with big tech to silence Americans a few years ago. What did we learn?
Well, we learned a lot, and we learned probably the tip of the iceberg. You know, no one loves the country more than I do, Chris, but the government isn't the country. We are. So let's talk about some of the un-American things this American government has done through the years. Now, nothing will ever top slavery and segregation, but it's not for lack of trying. We had internment of our own citizens in World War II. We had assassinations in the 1960s, quite possibly involving our own government. We had Obama IRS agents basically targeting conservative Americans. We had Obama spying on the media and reporters. How many people remember that? We had Obama spying on a presidential candidate. We had intelligence agencies framing that presidential candidate as a Russian asset, a traitor. And we had the justice system trying to imprison or bankrupt or at least stop from getting elected that particular candidate. Now, even all of these Hall of Shame, vile government scandals, as bad as they are, the Biden big tech collusion scandal, censoring conservatives, is right up there with them. And it was actually risked sliding into obscurity if not for Missouri Senator Eric Schmitt, who, as state attorney general, filed the Missouri v. Biden lawsuit over censorship, and this week convened the Senate Subcommittee on the Constitution's hearing on censorship. And in his opening remarks, he called it the larger, more formidable censorship industrial complex than he even knew. He called it, he said it spans all Western civilization. He called it a crisis that threatens to plunge much of what we once called the free world into darkness. What they built was, in effect, a second state, a faceless system of power not bound by the limits and liberties of our Constitution. This is a historic scandal, Chris, and it's all sinister. But maybe the most ominous part was the involvement of journalists. There's a special place in the Hall of Shame for that.
Yeah, and I'll say, Michael, excellent reporting on it, first of all. The worry is, Adam, are we learning from it? Can it happen again?
Yeah, well, that's an excellent question. I mean, Michael's absolutely right. This is epic in proportion. And I think for too long, people have kind of trusted their government, like, oh, they're going to do the right thing. But as we're proving, and I'm glad, like Trump's releasing some of the files on JFK and Russiagate and some of these other things, I think we need skepticism and we need vigilance going forward. Journalism is obviously, in terms of trustworthiness, Josh, it's in the toilet. Can it repair itself given these hearings? I mean, is there a way back out of the mess Michael just laid out?
Well, I think part of that way back out might be alternative media, and I think journalism is still alive and well. It just looks a little different than it used to, and I think Americans are getting used to that. And what we have to really double down on, I mean, I would encourage everybody, read Senator Schmitt's opening statement. If it is just half true, it's more than half true. It's he's got evidence. I mean, the Senate hearing, they have people testifying who are involved and in the know. But even if it were half true, it is a huge scandal. It's hugely alarming. I mean, in this country that's built really on the Bill of Rights, we have to be vigilant. And so I think alternative media, though, is filling that gap. And we've seen the growth, and the Lion itself has experienced that growth.
You know, I have to confess, before we move off this story, Michael, so caught up in the news cycle were most of us in this, and we're going to get into it later, this Signal app business between a member of the media and the national security team of Trump's. it really kind of sucked all the oxygen out of Schmidt's testimony and his hearing on this very important issue, to your point.
Yeah, and just as a consumer of news, I started watching his opening remarks on Newsmax, and they pulled out of the coverage, and I looked at all three C-SPANs, and they weren't even covering it.
Yeah, it's noteworthy. It's important. This is why Readline.com stays with the important stuff, even when maybe other people are so distracted. Josh, we turn to you on something that every parent ought to know. If you think DEI is on its way out, if you think it's now verboten in many school districts, not so fast. What have you learned?
Well, the Kansas City, Kansas Public School District has rebranded its DEI office as under the new name Organizational Development. Now, that doesn't sound too bad, but what we discovered was they're pretty much doing the same kinds of controversial, discriminatory, and indoctrination practices that had taxpayers concerned before, and what led to, probably to some extent, Trump's election and certainly his executive orders following his campaign promises to root these kinds of things out of public education. What happened in Kansas City, Kansas was this department held an LGBTQIA plus roundtable discussion. This was advertised to teachers in a newsletter. You can sign up for this, but we'll keep it secret. We'll delete all the emails after the call. During the call, which the Lion was able to, a recording of which the Lion was able to obtain, they said, this is Vegas rules. What goes on here stays here. But what was alarming was the fact the head of the department basically admitted they're trying to do the same kinds of things under their new branding, that her administrative heads had put political pressure on them to sort of change their name, to not continue to do this kind of discriminatory DEI stuff anymore, but they were going to continue to do it. And most of the teachers involved in the meeting were identified as LGBT of one sort or another, and were very eager to continue to promote their agenda in schools for kids as young as elementary, to, for example, hide pronouns from parents. There was an open discussion about this fact. The head of the department, Dr. Salinas, at one point said they need to have underground railroad conversations about these things. And another advocate said, where can we sneak things in? And so they're looking for loopholes to basically continuing to do the things that the administrators have told them to stop doing.
I always want to be careful not to paint with a broad brush, Adam, because I know not every public school teacher engages in it, but there is this obsession, it seems, with some to turn public schools into some kind of social experiment or recruitment effort. I read a story this week about a lesbian teacher and her lesbian partner who now claims she's a man. I don't know. Anyway, a transgender partner taking a 17-year-old student who identifies now as a male as well, taking him away from the parent. I mean, there's an advocacy, a sick mental advocacy component to this, Adam, that I'm trying to get my head wrapped around. It's clearly not about educating kids is the point.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I highly recommend, if you have not read this story in The Lion about the Kansas City school district meeting, go and read it, because in the case you're referencing, Chris, in Colorado, this is a national trend. And like you said, it's not every single school or every single teacher. But when I read the story, it really seems clear a lot of these folks in education, they are on a mission. They actually believe this is the right thing to do. It's a duty. It's a sacred calling. It's a mission to help these kids. And they're convinced this is the right and just and righteous thing to do. And if you don't agree with that, then you need to think twice about where you send your kids to school. And you also need to take a role in monitoring or paying attention to what's going on in your local school district.
That's assuming you're not banned from your local school. And Michael, you've written a story about that at readline.com.
Yeah, there's a Kansas City area mom, Carrie Schmidt, who has been dogging the Gardner-Edgerton suburban Kansas City school district over age-inappropriate books in the district. But in February, she took a picture of a poster, a sex-related poster, in the high school and shared it with libs of TikTok and went viral. And just days later, the district banned her from all properties, all district property, even some other districts' properties, and all events. Now, she sued, and on March 21st, a judge overturned the ban with a preliminary injunction. I talked with her lawyer, and basically he said she got the death penalty for essentially embarrassing the district. And that seems to be true, but more importantly than that, this seems to be a very crucial test of government power.
Josh, let me turn to the story of this D.C. judge trying to block the deportation of gang members. I know this week, in fact, as we record this, Kristi Noem, the Homeland Security Secretary, is headed down to this prison in El Salvador where they're keeping some 200-plus gang members. What do you know about the story?
Well, there's a huge battle. It's really a battle between branches of government, and it's raising constitutional questions for all parties involved. And the question is, what authority does the judicial branch, and particularly district judges, have when it comes to presidential or executive powers? And the Trump administration has made arguments about how they see their constitutional power and why this D.C. judge didn't have the right to basically order a plane to be turned around halfway to El Salvador. That's the particular story that gave rise to what is seemingly a battle, but it's raising larger questions that I think are really important. And I think it's a good reminder that Americans need to understand basic civics and basic government and how these things work. And I'll just commend my colleague Michael's book, You Rule, once again, just to start to get this background and what does it mean to be free and to rule ourselves. And, we as a nation elect one person. Citizens elect one individual collectively, and that's the President of the United States. Most other elections are local or state. And so there's a legitimate argument to be made for upholding the executive authority, especially in matters related to terrorism and infiltration of enemies. And that's sort of some of the legal background to what Trump particularly did.
Panel, thank you. When we get back, some of the sounds from Capitol Hill and around the country, and boy, it's been a hot one this week, from the text scandal on Capitol Hill to Teslas being vandalized. We'll get into it with the panel when we return here on the Lion Week in Review. Welcome back to the Lion Week in Review. I'm Chris Stigall, and if you missed any of the show or you're interested in more great news and information like you're hearing today, be sure to regularly check it out at readlion.com. We're back with our panel, the team that makes up the Lion, some of them anyway, Michael, Josh, and Adam. Panel, let's get into the hostility that's being directed at Tesla drivers, Tesla dealerships all across the country.
Cut off and berated, and it was all captured on camera. And the woman that was driving said the man that did all this was angry because she was driving a Tesla.
He gets out and walks straight up to my window. So I crack my window and I said, what is the problem? And he goes, you need to sell your car. This is a Nazi car. You're driving it. You need to sell your car.
Lee says she's been driving a Tesla for the last 2 years. She says a man wearing a camouflage jacket and a ski mask attacked her for it.
It's really sad, that this is what's happening to people who, honestly, it doesn't affect how I believe or what I believe.
So, what motivates it? Probably obvious, but this has gone to quite an extreme level. What's the remedy, if there is one, Adam?
Yeah, unfortunately, I struggle to believe that all of this is simply grassroots. I think there could be paid actors involved. I know that a lot of protests and protest marches are paid and paid agitators. So that's something that the media almost never really talks about. But you'll see the same people are at all these rallies in different states. They're being bussed in, they're being flown in. And I think, too, sometimes the media is too complicit in just, oh, wow, this is happening, but doesn't want to get into why or telling the truth. And it's a very sad situation.
Michael Pambondi's now talking about maybe actually leveling some charges. There have been some mugshots. I assume that's part of what needs to happen here.
Well, if you're doing this kind of damage to make a political point, that's domestic terrorism. And what these people don't understand is that Teslas have more cameras than a national network. So smile, you're on candid camera. And it's all because he's saving us money. He's rescuing astronauts stranded in space, and he's trying to cure paralysis and blindness. Wow.
It is kind of interesting, Josh, that this is an American-made car made by Americans, and you have some Democrats like Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, cheering the decline of Tesla stock, among other things.
Yeah, I don't understand it. I mean, if you disagree with someone, that's fine. It's America. You want to buy a car, drive a certain kind of car because you like it, that's fine. It's America. I mean, it seems like not that long ago, we knew maybe the politics of the CEOs of various companies, and we still bought their products even if we disagreed with them. I wish we'd get back there. I was trying to remember the last time I was driving around in a ski mask, and, I couldn't remember the time. So I don't know what's this guy doing? Driving around in a ski mask? Maybe he, to Adam's point, was looking for Teslas to stop and to, harass. But that's the only reason I can think you might be wearing a ski mask.
All right, so we've learned a lot about something called the Signal app. I don't use it, but a lot of people on Capitol Hill apparently do, particularly those inside Donald Trump's National Security Advisory team. Mike Walz is National Security Advisor. It's been alleged, I guess it's relatively easy to prove, accidentally looped in the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic, a guy called Jeffrey Goldberg. Goldberg is not a fan of the Trump administration, has openly written columns, hostile columns that have proven not to be true, by the way, in the previous Trump administration. And he releases some texts between Team Trump on the strategic attack on the Houthis. This became news just before big hearings on Capitol Hill. Mike Walz was asked by Laura Ingraham on Fox News about this, and here's some of what he had to say.
We're going to get to the bottom of it. I just talked to Elon on the way here. We've got the best technical minds looking at how this happened. But I can tell you for 100%, I don't know this guy. I know him by his horrible reputation, and he really is the bottom scum of journalists. And I know him in the sense that he hates the president, but I don't text him. He wasn't on my phone. And we're going to figure out how this happened. So you don't.
Of course, the problem with this is Mike Walz, it does appear by the full release now of this transaction between all the principals involved on the call and Goldberg, it literally says that Mike Walz added Goldberg to the conversation. So simple error, or what have we here, and what's Mike Walz's responsibility to it all? Michael, I'll start with you.
Well, he's responsible, but there may be somebody else involved, too. It could have been sabotage for all we know. It's somebody at that level is not necessarily going to be typing in a whole bunch of phone numbers himself. But, the Atlantic released some of these texts that they captured, and it's like the Atlantic ordered up a nothing burger with nothing on it. Compelling public interest, they said. I think the compelling interest here was embarrassing the Trump administration.
Yeah, I mean, as we record this, what's interesting is Goldberg went on some different media appearances to try to explain his role in this. Now, what you're about to hear is an exchange prior to the release of all of these. All of these communications have been released since this, but this was just 24 hours earlier as he was explaining what he found and what he was thinking about releasing. Take a listen.
Wow. Well, you want to become my lawyer?
I'm throwing this out there, Jeff. I don't know. I mean, look.
I feel like no. I mean, I obviously. Let me just put it this way: my colleagues and I, and the advice and the people who are giving us advice on this, have some interesting conversations to have about this.
Yeah.
But just because they're irresponsible with material doesn't mean that I'm going to be irresponsible with this material.
He made allegations, guys, that, there were CIA operatives in this thing and all of that. Well, anyway, since that conversation you just heard, the full thing's been released. None of the stuff that he was suggesting might be in it was in it, as a matter of fact. And so I guess that brings me to a broader question about Goldberg himself. Someone asked me, Josh, I'm a talk show host. I'm not a journalist, but if I was privy to Biden administration private conversations, would I listen in? Would you as a journalist listen in? What's our duty to report it versus let the government know it was an accident? How do you feel about all that?
Well, that's a great question. I'm not really sure how I feel about it, but what What I am more certain of, or the feelings I do have about it, are that clearly he has an agenda. Clearly he disagrees with the administration, and so there's an incentive, there's a motive here to embarrass them. I think that's clear. He seems to have exaggerated how bad it was. But at the end of the day, I don't care who the president is or the team. I think, yeah, the journalists shouldn't have been part of the call. However it happened, I think, good. They're figuring it out. They've got bright people looking into it. Let's fix it. Let's make sure it doesn't happen again. But, the clip we just listened to, he sounded pretty self-righteous. I think the Goldberg part of it has to be taken with a grain of salt.
The Director of National Intelligence, Adam, I'll get your response on the other side of Tulsi Gabbard. She gave testimony just this week after all of this and said this about that exchange. She was also part of this text exchange. Take a listen.
It was a mistake that a reporter was inadvertently added to a signal chat with high-level national security principals having a policy discussion about imminent strikes against the Houthis and the effects of the strike. National Security Advisor has taken full responsibility for this, and the National Security Council is conducting an in-depth review along with technical experts working to determine how this reporter was inadvertently added to this chat. The conversation was candid and sensitive, but as the President National Security Advisor stated, no classified information was shared.
And that seems to be true, Adam. There is no national security interest information in the thing. I've read it all prior to our conversation here today. The president says he's standing by Mike Walls. What's your read on all of it?
Yeah, I think, first of all, it's refreshing to hear someone like Tulsi Gabbard up there just speaking fairly candidly and straightforwardly. Like, yes, there was a mistake, but no, it was not classified information. And that seems to be borne out by what you read as well.
And then finally, what do the Democrats do here? They've been desperate for something to talk about. Maybe that's what we've been discussing. They've finally found their thing with this Walls situation, because otherwise, what's their future? Is it AOC? Is it Bernie? Is it Jasmine Crockett? Here's a little bit of MSNBC discussing the AOC-Bernie Fight the Oligarchy tour.
I think, I talked to a bunch of Democrats this week who are happy that this tour, these kinds of things are happening just like you, but they agree. They think that the word oligarch is maybe one that they should skip, right? And go with something like corruption or something like that, right? That makes clear that there's a connection there and that people understand in their everyday lives, and the one that is already kind of exists in the lexicon of our political environment, and that that gets people riled up.
Michael, the guy with the painted nails, says fight the oligarchy gets people riled up.
Well, it's interesting. This oligarchy is the Democrats' focus group tested word of the month, I guess. Let's talk about oligarchy. I mean, you got some pretty rich, powerful, longtime Democrat members of Congress, and then you've got Elon Musk and Donald Trump, who are billionaires working for free to save taxpayers money. That's the difference.
And then there's Jasmine Crockett, the Texas representative who was speaking just this last week at a function, a dinner, a dressy affair, and she made reference to Governor Greg Abbott of Texas. Take a listen.
We in these hot-ass Texas streets, honey. Y'all know we got Governor Hot Wheels down there. Come on now. And the only thing hot about him is that he is a hot-ass mess, honey. So,
All right, Adam, is that the future of the Democrats?
Well, I certainly hope not. It's very sad and very, very disturbing to see this woman making fun of a governor who's been in a wheelchair for over 40 years. And it's not a good look at all.
So, Josh, if they don't have this signal scandal to cling to, it doesn't seem like they have much messaging going on right now for them, the Democrats.
They're searching, certainly, and I guess MSNBC audience is interested in hearing talking heads talk about Democrat strategy. I don't know. It's a pretty small audience who gets excited about that, I think, but clearly they're searching and they're not finding answers yet. And so we'll just have to wait and see. Governor Newsom's taking a stab at it, trying to pull himself to the middle. I don't know if it'll work.
All right, panel, thank you very much. Coming up next on the Lion Week in Review, our panel picks their favorite stories of the week that they say you can't miss. Stay tuned for that as the Lion Week in Review rolls on. Welcome back to the Lion Week in Review as we take a look at the panel's favorite stories of the week. These are reads they say you can't miss. Adam, we start with you.
Yeah, I'm actually going to shout out Michael's story on Senator Schmidt and censorship. And this is a very important look at that censorship industrial complex, and you don't want to miss it.
Michael?
Yeah, we talked about it earlier in the show, the where can we sneak things in? Kansas school staff quietly advanced DEI agenda without parents' knowledge headline. It's more proof that they're not your kids, they're theirs. How dare these people try to hide and steer other people's children's sexual and moral development? And where do they get off flouting federal law on DEI? You know, even a presidential executive order isn't enough to stamp out this indoctrination in schools. It's insidious and it's baked in.
Josh Mann, your favorite story this week.
Well, here's a different one. You know what helps the brain develop and even might prolong your life? Believe it or not, having kids and more kids. We published a story on research about that that might surprise some people, especially tired parents like myself. Heck, really, this is helpful. But what the research found was it's kind of a trial by fire. I mean, some of the trials of parenthood helps challenge the brain and develop some biological advantages. And so stories like this, we actually publish stories like this from time to time where there is basically research suggesting that that a pro-family approach to life has all sorts of benefits that maybe most people haven't considered. And so, you know, after I think a few decades of declining birth rates and maybe kind of the family getting hammered as a cultural institution, we're starting to see this kind of renaissance, so to speak, of pro-family sentiment. And this is just one example of that, which you can read about on The Lion.
I'll read up on that. That's very good news because as the dad of 3 teenagers, I feel like I've lost a few years of my life, but maybe that changes later. Thank you, panel, very much. That's going to do it for us this week on the Lion Week in Review. Be sure to keep up to date on all the latest news, stories like these and so many more. Bookmark the page so you never miss a day at readlion.com. And again, if you missed any of today's show, check it out on our YouTube page. And for all of us at The Lion, until we see you next time, thanks for listening and downloading the show.